Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am the Catholic Homemaker and I share all things faith, education, and homemaking. Every Thursday, I post a Thursday theology video inspired by suggestions from my Instagram followers. Follow my Instagram at catholic.homemaker for my day-to-day lifestyle and homemaking tips. And don't forget, subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that notification bell so that you can be reminded whenever I upload a video. Today's Thursday theology will be on the rule of life for you as an individual and for your family. We are going to talk about how to establish a rule of life, what it actually is, and why it's so important for the spiritual life. A rule of life is any standard or expectation for your life. It gives you focus and direction, and it allows you to make the spiritual life easier. It's hard enough to pray and to do all of these things in our day, but this allows you to have a structure and a focus so that your direction towards heaven is made a little bit easier. In fact, Aristotle even says that the reason why we even build virtue, good habits, is because it makes life easier. So when we want to be better, we are actually making our lives easier. Convents and monasteries actually have a rule of life. It's basically a huge rule that says what they can and cannot do. It's basically a code of conduct. A rule helps us to keep patterns in our life, to make sure that our life is flowing in a rhythm. The word rule has bad connotations in our society. We've all heard it. They think that rules cause limitations. They take away freedom. But that's not what a rule is supposed to be. It's actually about freedom. And actually, the word rule comes from the word regula in Latin, which basically means to have a pattern or rhythm for your life. So with that said, a rule is basically a set of conduct for existing. It's not to have a list of rules. It's to live a life of order and pattern and rhythm so that your soul becomes more ordered and more disciplined. It is a means, not an end, okay? So when you have a rule, it doesn't mean it is the end all be all. Our lives should have a direct focus, and that focus should be God because He is the end. He is supposed to be the end of our lives. There are a few things that make a rule what it actually is. The first thing is promises to God. Now, you need to consider what promises you have made to God and what promises you intend to make. Now, keep in mind that making promises or vows to God is not really recommended only because once you make a vow or a promise, it would take a pastor or a bishop to unbind you from those vows. It's very important that you try to be starting small with your spiritual life and not making big promises that you may or may not be able to accomplish. Now, there are vows that you may have probably made. The consecration to Mary, for example. That has to be part of your rule if that's a promise that you've already made. Keep in mind that whatever promise you make binds you. The second thing you want to keep in mind when developing a rule is regimen. Now, what we mean by regimen is something that is ordered in a day-to-day rhythm to your life, like I mentioned earlier. Now, after the fall of Adam and Eve, human beings kind of feel like their time is their own. It doesn't belong to anyone else but themselves. And so they make a lot of time for themselves and not a lot of time for God or others. The day-to-day hourly lifestyle of an individual is called in Latin horarium. So this is basically hours of your day. In your horarium, you want to have a wake-up time, a sleep time, prayer time, reflection time. All of that has to be in specific times of the day. Now, those times may differ throughout your day. For example, for me, when I pray the rosary, it all depends on when my child goes to sleep. For naps, I pray a decade every time he goes to sleep because it allows me to keep a consistent schedule. I know he sleeps twice a day, so that means I'll get at least 2 naps, 2 rosary decades in. Another recommendation for this is as soon as you wake up, do a sign of the cross. It doesn't have to be an elaborate prayer. If you prefer an elaborate prayer right when you wake up, when you're in your bed, do that. What I find works for me is getting up, brushing my teeth, getting ready for the day. That allows me to say, I'm not going back to sleep and I'm going to get up and do what I need to do. Now that's part of my rule. It may not be part of your rule or my husband's rule or whatever it may be, but I find that it works really well for me. Have a consistent sleep time. Good sleep gives a more consistent and structured prayer life. A very important part of a regimen is your prayer time. Now, this is pretty obvious, but try to make prayer time throughout your day during practical life things. I'm going to tell you, when I was in the convent, which is a story for another day, I actually would pray 3 Hail Marys when I brushed my teeth every morning and every evening. I did that so that I could remember to do it, and I offered it for a very specific intention. So it allowed me to get prayer time in and to use practical life things and offer them to God. It's a win-win. You should have some time to reflect or meditate. Now, this doesn't have to be an elaborate thing. It doesn't have to be an hour. All it needs to be is just a time in your day where you really reflect on your life and the things that you have around you. Sometimes I'll be in my child's playroom and just reflecting on how he's getting older and how thankful I am to God for him. That probably takes less than a minute, but the fact is, I am reflecting during my day. If you have more time for reflection, consider that. What's also really important is an examination of conscience. I find this best to do at night right before I sleep. And in fact, what I like to do is do it with my husband because telling him makes me more accountable. And so if you have a spouse, try to examine your consciences together because it really helps to be accountable for the things that you are doing, and it helps you talk about what you would want to work on. For those of you who don't know what an examination of conscience is, it's basically really looking through your day and thinking, what sins did I commit? What things could I have done better? What did I omit from my day that I should have done? Try to make time for extra prayers in your week. So if you can go to Mass once a day maybe, or even once a week, or go to adoration once or twice a week, put that in your rule. Allow yourself to do these kinds of things if you have the time for it. Another thing we should be doing is spiritual reading. Now, this one I know is really hard for some people, but if it's hard for you, start really small. You can only read a small scripture passage in a day. That's okay. The fact is, you're reading and you're reflecting in addition to that. Also, make time for your responsibilities and your duties. Every day, have a list for yourself. Say, I need to do laundry, I have to mop, I have to wash the dishes, I have to do these things that are required. That's what I do. I have a list of things that are everyday responsibilities, and everything else works around that. And here's my favorite thing. Make sure you have time for yourself, some downtime. If you're an introvert, you really need to make sure you have that quiet time to yourself. If it means waking up earlier in the morning, sleeping a little bit later at night, just so you have that alone time, that's good. That's what's going to get you to be where you need to be and to be able to grow in the spiritual life. If you're a really busy person, maybe a doctor, a teacher, whatever it may be, try to build good habits during your day, prayer times during your day. Between each patient, pray a Hail Mary. Pray a Hail Mary for each patient that you see. If you're a teacher, pray between each class period or each subject that you're going to teach. Basically, be creative with your prayer time. It doesn't have to be rigid, you guys. When it comes to your rule, write it somewhere that you will see every single day. I have a whiteboard in my kitchen. It is in the forefront of my mind. I know all the things that I need to do, all the times that I committed to prayer, and I remind myself of them. Write it down. And even if someone has to see it as well, that's okay because that will hold you more accountable. Another very important part of your rules should be building virtue, which is good habits, and eradicating bad habits, which are vices. So if you have a problem with eating too much during the day, make a rule that you are only going to eat during eating times or that you are not going to snack between meals. Through structure, we build virtue. So if you want an ordered life, structure it. Once you structure your life, you will become more virtuous and more disciplined and more ordered. Okay, here are some tips for you if you want to build a rule of life for yourself or for your family. The first tip is start small. Don't go in too heavy-handed. Make sure that all of the things that you promise to do or that you commit to do are practical, reasonable, and something that you can attain. Number 2, be specific. Don't say things that are ideological. Make sure that your rules or your expectations are specific, practical, and pragmatic. Number 3, consider your personality. If you're somebody that needs a lot of alone time, make sure you schedule that in during your day. If you're more of an extrovert and you need to see people, make sure that you schedule time to see your friends during the week or even during the day, maybe a phone call here and there. Don't commit too much to a lot of difficult things. Make sure that you have things in your day that are more fulfilling, more enjoyable, and more fun for you. Practices that are more difficult allow you to grow in the spiritual life. So they're good to have, but they shouldn't outweigh the things that are easier. As a general rule, you want to have a few difficult things and a lot of easy, more enjoyable things, as long as those enjoyable things are wholesome and good for you. Also, keep a healthy balance between structure and spontaneity. Make sure that you allow time in your day that is not committed to one specific thing so that you can allow yourself to be more spontaneous, to go out or to do something that somebody asks you to do, for example. A good rule should feel like freedom, not slavery. Finally, remember that a good rule is a working document. It is not supposed to be static. It is supposed to be dynamic and moving, just like we are. We are constantly changing creatures. And in fact, the more we grow in the spiritual life, the more we can do because we become accustomed to it. And that's the whole point of gaining virtue. I guarantee you, a rule of life is going to help you become closer to Christ. And that's the whole point of all of this. If you want to build your relationship with God, commit times to Him. And even if they are mundane things like going to the grocery store and saying a prayer while you're there, whatever it may be, God listens and God wants us to have structure. He is the epitome of structure and order. A rule of life will allow you to grow in the spiritual life. I hope you enjoyed this week's Thursday Theology. If you have any suggestions for the next talks, go ahead and DM me on Instagram at catholic.homemaker, and make sure that you subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up if you like this video.